Welcome. Geo is in snowy Midwest today, and we are here with David Fisher, who is the managing director at Fisher Global Development and also the founder of a co-warehousing business, Kefi Spaces, and Business eSuites, which is a co-working and self-storage space in Sugarland, Texas. David and I met Geo. I was like, I'm going to have to mention this because it's such a great testimonial for the GWA conference. I was like, I've known you and Laura for so long. How did we connect? And we were at the 2019 conference in DC, and we were going to the after party, which was
Right.
in Alexandria, right? And so everybody had to get cabs, and I can't remember if it was like a theme and what we were
It
wearing,
was
but
it was a thing. It was that. I don't remember the thing, but it was a thing.
okay, it was a theme. So David and Laura, brave souls, that might have been your first conference, were like,
Right.
okay. So they're standing outside. We're waiting for Ubers, and it was hard to get an Uber or something. And I think it was Abigail who was like, let's share with these guys. And so we just got in an Uber. Or maybe you said, hey, we're going. You can come with us. So we got in an Uber and like spent 20 minutes getting to know each other. And then that was history. So David and Laura were in our operator mastermind forever. And then Colin, right? Is it Colin?
Colin's our son.
Yeah. He was in our community manager university program. So, and Laura did a webinar on her fabulous mail program for us. So David's the front man, but Laura is
Okay.
really where it happens. So, and you guys were on the podcast. I looked today. You were on the Everything Co-working podcast in June of 2022, which is
Right.
forever ago. I thought it was more recent than that. So I'm looking forward to catching up. And you guys have met.
Yes.
We have.
Okay, good.
It's interesting, Dave. So you'll get a good kick out of this. I get the task of scheduling a lot of our Flex Uncensored podcast guests, and so I'm trying to scroll back and see if I can find it. But I get random texts from Jamie every once in a while. It's like, oh my gosh, we have to have these people on. So I don't know why you came across her mind, but I got a random text from her one day that was like, we need to get David Fisher on. I was like, okay, easy enough. And I reached out and here we are. So glad to have you here. And
Yeah.
it's an exciting time of the year, obviously starting 2025. And there's a big upside. There's big announcements that have been coming out and all kinds of fun stuff. So glad to have you on.
Gio, while you were taking your phone call, David was just telling me he would like to start his own 2 podcasts. And I was like, dude, no. We'll talk about that later. But they do have a podcast studio in their co-working space, which is beautiful. Okay, so David, you have a pretty rich background. I love your story. So we don't have time you're gonna have to give us the short version because we have some topics to dive into. But yeah, tell us about like you have an aviation history and then real estate. Give us the overview of
I'll
how
give you the Reader's
we came to
Digest
get
version.
okay.
So I'm a corporate jet broker, and I do a lot of corporate jet appraisals. So that's what I do in my spare time. And actually, that's my primary job. The rest of my role in the company is I'm visionary. I am the visionary. Laura couldn't vision anything, but she can operate like a bad dog. Okay. So once we get it up, actually, once I create it, then she takes over. She does the designing, she does all operations, and that is what she does. And I hate the details. So together we make a good combination because I'll say, hey, that piece of dirt over there is going to do this, or that vacant building over there can do this. And she can't see that. But once I get it and we're committed, literally she runs with it. So so in the corporate jet world, it has its ups and downs, and I love it and I spend a lot of time on it. But for the real estate, that is the mailbox money. That is what we do, and it's reoccurring revenue. The reason I started co-working is because I had a mini storage. I have a mini storage today, and when I expanded it, I added more mini storage. I added office warehouses, and upstairs, I turned the entire second floor into co-working. We call it Business E-Suites. That's our brand. And as a result of that, we found that it was very successful. And here's the great part about it. When office is in high demand, which is more when kids are back in school, is when storage is in low demand. And when people are moving, summer times, for example, storage gets full, but office goes down. So if you look at a teeter-totter, our revenue stays pretty equal, because obviously an office space rents for more than, say, a parking space or a storage unit. Okay. And so per square foot, we're making a heck of a lot more money on the office part, but it does require more manpower. You supply internet and access controls and coffee and co-working and everything else. But it's a great combination. And that is what we created at our business park. And we call it Imperial Business Park in Sugar Land. So then I was stuck with a dilemma where my office warehouses were full. We have a waiting list, and generally when one goes vacant, we fill it within 10 minutes. Okay. But I asked those folks, where are you going? And they said, well, we need more room and your walls don't move. And so I invented something called co-warehousing. And as I started to research it, since I invented it, I found out that it already existed. So I went from invention mode to copycat mode. I went and visited Saltbox and Ready Spaces and CubeWorks and everything else. And it's a lot easier to copy than it is to invent. Let me promise you that. And so when I did that, I was like, what can I take that is the best of each one? And so we created something called Kefi Spaces. And Kefi Spaces is co-warehousing. Part of it is office, exactly, co-working. But then right there in the same building is co-warehousing, where there's warehouse space. And in our first building that we have, there's 10,000 square foot of office and there's 40,000 square foot of warehouse. So now we're looking to expand additional facilities, and our target market was always e-commerce people, but that was basically who we thought our ideal tenant would be. But it's morphed into more than that. Since we're climate controlled, we have people that wholesale wine and just a whole lot of electronics. We have a lot of people who do home theaters and things like that, and they can't store their components, TVs and whatnot, in a hot warehouse. And so that is what we found occupies our space as well. And that's my short version.
Okay. And did you mention you built Business E-Suites from the dirt?
I did.
Yeah. Which I agree. I'm probably not that visionary. Like the process of constructing a building like that is, yeah. But you did.
Well, the way that happened is we have warehouses in the back of our property. We call them small bay warehouses, which is basically just, a warehouse of various sizes. And people indicated they really wish they had an office. And so when I have this dirt, I acquired the land directly adjacent to me. And I said, why don't we build 14 of those 12 by 40 units and add a 12 by 10 office in front of it. So, and our storage office was terrible. And so I added a really nice Class A storage office. And so that was the drawings. That was it. And then a lot of our tenants were like talking about office space. I knew nothing about co-working. I mean, zero. And so I sent my wife and one of our assistants out to every co-working facility in Houston to get me floor plans and pricing. And then I sent it all to the architect and I said, what about adding a second floor? And so he said, sure, we're just drawing. I mean, you could add 50 floors, I mean, so we did. We added the second floor and it was all offices and conference rooms and everything else. And it was more the old Regis style where there was like no windows, and and so that was it. And then I read an article that WeWork had gone into the Houston Galleria. And I went to go see WeWork, and I have to tell you, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I FaceTimed my architect and I said, get rid of the walls, put in glass, do this, do this. I want this. And he said, Dave, this is going to cost you a heck of a lot more money. And I said, I can't even see anything else. Let's build this. And it was a great decision. I just want you to know.
Part of it, I changed my background.
I just saw that. That is so
Oh,
awesome.
very nice. There we go.
So the fun part is, you start off with your background of in with airplanes and aerospace and everything else. And I thought that was the coolest part when I visited your space, is so much of it is designed around that. You want to talk, let's start, because my idea is you start off with you start off with the airplane side and aerospace, then you did business e-suites around that and kind of how you built that, which allowed for you to get to the co-warehousing. So let's just, for people that didn't listen to your podcast with Jamie, let's kind of start there. Is on the co-working side. I mean, literally you have a theme behind your space you want to talk about, because even your cafe is based around it.
Yes. Everything is aviation themed. Every conference room is named after a corporate jet. Our day office is the Piper day office after a Piper jet. You're sitting right now, technically, in the Falcon co-working space. And if you can see, you're in a hangar, and we call that the hangar. Okay. And then adjacent to that, on the opposite side, is the Falcon executive room, which is a really nice executive conference room. We have the Gulfstream room, which, as you can imagine, is your largest conference room. And so every conference room has a name. Our kitchen area is called the fueling station, and we have a pilot lounge. So everything is themed after aviation. So a lot of our furniture is aviation. And I have to tell you something really cool that nobody knows. I just acquired an aircraft that I had shipped over here, a real corporate turboprop that is scrap. And I'm taking the wings and we're polishing them up, and we're going to turn them into desks. And I'm taking the tail fin and I'm turning it into room dividers. And then I'm going to take the cabin and I'm going to turn it into 2 telephone rooms.
Okay, so when you say this to Laura, Laura says, "Sure, Dave," or does she say, "Are you out of your mind?" Like, how does this go down?
I don't know what goes on in her head, but so when I acquired Kefi Spaces, she didn't really find out about it until I actually acquired the building. And at that point, because so her title used to be CF No. And so every time I had an idea, it would be no. And so what I just decided,
I love that,
was create
But
it.
that's her job, because you're too visionary. Somebody needs to tell you no.
Right.
No.
So let me share with you how Business eSuites started. We had this old cabin, and this old cabin on the property, we had it here, and the construction company that built the storage facility, they vacated, and we acquired their land, which included the cabin, and it had 14 offices. And I needed a place to work. I was working at home doing corporate aircraft, and I told her I needed to be on the property to manage the expansion and whatnot, and I needed to modify the cabin so I could have an office. And she said, "Well, what's it going to cost?" And I said, a couple of $1,000s to paint it and fix up some things. And so anyway, I think it was like $13,000 later that it was finished. And she was very upset, and she's like, "How are you going to repay the storage facility? Because the storage facility is the one that did it." And I said, "Well, we'll rent out the other offices." So we rented out the offices for about, at the time, $500 a month each, times 14 offices, times 7 years. And I just thought to myself, we're more than just a storage facility. We're more like a business park. And
Yeah.
that's how business e-suites came to be, because a lot of the people, and we had a waiting list for these offices, a lot of the people that were in those offices, they needed more. And so for the longest time, the cabin caught fire and it's gone now, but we had the cabin, which I called Motel 6. And then we had business e-suites, what I called the Ritz-Carlton. And so sometimes
Which it is. It's a pretty premium space. I mean, that's why I love, like, you built it from the ground. And I
Yeah.
do want to talk about, one of your, sort of perspectives is like a changing avatar and Kefi space. And assume you're talking about Kefi spaces, but it's like who you had in mind when you created this self-storage facility with this premium workspace on the second floor.
So my avatar, and avatars change, but my avatar was the gray collar worker. And the gray collar worker is the CEO of a construction company who uses our storage, small construction. They use our storage, they use our warehousing, they use our parking, but they need a nice place to work and they need nice conference rooms to meet with prospective clients and vendors and things like that. And so they're really a white collar person in a blue collar industry. And so I call them the gray collar workers. And so we had a guy named Michael Morgan who was here, and the guy drove a Bentley and, did a lot of, he still does road construction in Houston. And he's definitely on the upper echelon of white collar workers, but he's in a blue collar industry. You'll agree. And he really just needed a place to hang his hat, meet with clients, but he wasn't here every day. In fact, he wasn't here hardly ever. And so that's my typical avatar, was a Michael Morgan.
Okay, tell us about Kefi Spaces. And you mentioned e-commerce, but that has shifted. And we were talking pre-recording about marketing of that business and, how do you learn? How do people find? How do they know about the solution? What are they searching for? Yeah, tell us about that.
If you think about marketing for co-warehousing, in the early stages that we got into it, there was no set. I mean, if you want to find somebody to market self-storage, I mean, they're a dime a dozen. If you want to market co-working, maybe they're a nickel a dozen, but realistically, it's not that hard to find people that can do the marketing. Co-warehousing was a different thing. And the reason it was so different is because you didn't know what search terms to use for Google marketing and things like that. And you're paying a lot for hit and miss. Due to the fact that I was not the inventor of the industry, I believe the loading dock really was out in North Carolina. If you get back to the real history of it, although Saltbox tells you they are, but loading dock is where Saltbox got their info. Realistically, you got to go back to see how are they being found on the internet. And I talked to some of them, and I talked to their former employees. We looked at Saltbox, and we looked at Ready Spaces, and the 800-pound gorilla is CubeWorks. And we looked at them and how are they searching, and our marketing people can go in and look to see what keywords they use and everything. And from there, we were able to start with a foundation, but it's still a young industry, co-warehousing. And so I think even today, people try to find their niche. We have a really good group when it comes to marketing for co-warehousing now.
You going to share who that group is, or are you going to keep them secret?
Who we use?
Yeah.
We use a company called Ahava.
Okay.
And Ahava has learned with us. And they do our storage, our co-working, our co-warehousing, and they also do Western Aviation's marketing. So we've been with Ahava for well over a decade. We really like, and they're flexible and they learn. And Laura's in love with them. And so even if I wanted to get rid of them, I never could. Okay. Because, happy wife, happy life, right? And I do have to make up for the fact that I throw her in these buckets like, oh, by the way, we just acquired this warehouse and, I have to recover from that. So that is what we do. And the other thing that we did is we brought in a really advanced CRM called Go High Level. And the advanced part of it is really what you do with it, not just, I mean, Go High Level can be basic and that could be really robust. And what we did with Go High Level was, certain scripts and follow-ups and steps that it does. And all of that part of Go High Level is a great way to follow up and keep things moving with prospective clients.
So how did you meet? How did Laura and you meet?
You're never going to believe it. We've been married 26 years and we met on the internet.
26 years ago.
Was the internet, hold on, I'm trying to do some math. That was pretty early internet days. We
met on a website. You might be able to research it. It was owned by Lycos, Lycos, and it was called Christian Matchmaker. And I was traveling a lot with aviation and she worked in College Station, Texas. I was in Houston. I'd heard of College Station, but I'd never been there. And we met and we went on a date, and 6 months later we were married, and that was 26 years ago. We just celebrated our 26th wedding anniversary on Halloween, or the day before Halloween. So we were the very first people ever to meet on the internet. We were if you ever wanted to know who was the first one, it was
You invented meeting on the internet. That one.
You're a lot of first. You're a lot of first, my friend.
Well, let me tell you, being first is not good, because you make a lot of mistakes that other people now can learn from your mistakes. So, but no, we weren't really the first, but I can share with you that we've lasted 26 years, and it was called Christian Matchmaker. Christian Matchmaker, something like that.
What are the gifts that she has that allows for her to put up with you?
She is very religious. She prays a lot, and
dear God, save me from this man who I've been married to for 26 years and his crazy ideas.
Forgiveness a lot.
Yeah,
she's very supportive. I can share that with you. She's very supportive, and we do talk about plans and things like that. But she's really supportive. I've never even heard people talk about their wives being as supportive as my wife is, because some of the things I do is it's hit and miss sometimes, and it takes a lot of faith. So she does support me.
So it's funny. So you say that. So Dave Ramsey, who I'm sure you know, basically says there is a saver and there's a spender. And so this kind of falls in that category. Is there's a crazy person and a sane person.
Right.
So I'll let you guess which one you are. And
I know.
But again, it's the people that challenge things that are what drive change and innovation and all those things, which is what you've been doing.
Well, it's about creating possibility out of nothing. You look at something and it's a vacant lot. Some people see it as just a bunch of dirt. Other people see it as a thriving business, depending on what their area of expertise is. I see it as that business. I go and see a vacant big box retail store that's been vacant for 10 years, and I'm thinking it's a gold mine, and other people are thinking it should be demolished. It's just what you visualize, which is why I call myself the visionary. Now, once you've acquired it and you've budgeted and you brought in people to tell you, well, this isn't going to work and you need a new AC system, then at that point, and the numbers work, then I can sit down and share with her where I'm going with it, what the method to the madness is. And then she'll go ahead and take it from there. So, when I was trying to get business e-suites financed and the expansion of our storage facility, I was turned down by 25 different banks. Okay. Because I was going from a $2.5 million loan to a $13.8 million loan. And 25 different banks said no. And I just thought, I need one more, just one more no. So I just kept embracing the no. And I would learn from it. Why did you say no? Some people told me, some people didn't. At the end of the day, the 26th bank did the deal.
That's incredible.
Persistence.
Which explains why she's the chief no officer, right?
But not her. In fact, she said to me that she said to me when I called her up and I said, so the SBA, the reason the SBA said no is they'll finance storage, but they would not finance, and they may have never financed. I don't know. You guys would know better than I if they've ever financed office space. At the time, they had never financed office space. So when I was talking to the CDC, which is the community development, he's kind of the intermediary between the SBA and the bank. I said, why do they keep saying no to me? And he said, well, they don't do owner occupied. Well, I didn't know what that meant. And I said, well, I don't occupy the storage. I don't live there. He goes, no, but you do occupy it because you have truck rentals, you have, retail that you sell. And so technically you're running the business in the business. He said, office space is not that way. They rent office space. The owner's not running a business. He's not renting trucks, et cetera. I said, okay, I understand that. The other key is month to month. Now, you can do a term agreement, but we also offer month-to-month agreements on co-working. And the fact that office space does not rent on a month-to-month, but co-working does, means it is owner, it can be considered owner occupied. But again, like you said, Gio, the first. Well, let me tell you, being the first can be really hard because now you got to change people's mindset. And I had to present to 25 different lenders and they didn't want to hear it. And one of the reasons they didn't want to hear it is because they knew darn well that they were going to do all this work and they were going to get a no. So I finally found one bank, and I'm going to share with you who they are. Bank 59. Okay. And I read in a magazine that they were the #1 self-storage lender. And I sent them my package, including self-storage and the co-working space. And they said, if you can get a CDC that will run with this, we'll do the loan. It's funny because the day before, my CDC said, if you can get a bank to do this, I'll do the loan. So I put the two together. And then my CDC, he said, all right, now that we got it together, he said, the SBA's never approved this. It could take months for them to do this. 15 minutes later, I had an approval. So I called my wife and I said, we got approved. And she's like, oh my God, what do you want to do? I go, I want to go to bed. I'm just exhausted. And so that was how we got it done.
So for those that don't know, what's a CDC?
It's a community development coordinator. We use Bill Eversole, and he's a great out of the box thinker. I worked with him on some aircraft hangars before 2008, before the crash. And what he does is he takes these SBA loans and he bundles them up for a fee and he puts them together in what's called a debenture, and they sell this to the market. Insurance companies buy them and things like that. So they package these loans together. And so he's key because the SBA relies on the CDC to do all this legwork, and the SBA guarantees a certain amount of the money. In our case, a 7A loan is up to 5 million. A 504 loan goes up to 5.5, but it could be more, like ours was 13.8. So 5.5 of it was guaranteed. Plus we had equity already because we had an existing storage business. And so the bank actually didn't have a lot to risk, but they were still important because they were doing what was called the first lien, and the SBA takes on the second lien. And the CDC is kind of the one that packages it all together. So without the CDC, you can't do it. And they're the community development coordinator. There, you got to sell the CDC on the deal. You never talk to the SBA person. That's not the way the program works.
Yeah. So the interesting part is we've been working through this. And so the SBA, so we'd had a bunch of deals go through the SBA for co-working approval. And as of July of this year, they basically came out with a PowerPoint slide. So there was never like a formal memo or anything sent that said they were no longer going to approve salon suites, office suites, or ghost kitchens. And so the interesting part is some of the criteria under which they wouldn't approve it is based off of private offices that are lockable. So they become your office that you go to day after day. It being called rent instead of membership dues. And then the last one is you took care of the common areas. And so the interesting part, back to your point, is our argument is the fact that self-storage, you get your own space that you get to put a lock on. You can build it out how you want on the inside, right? You have the common areas that you essentially are basically controlling. And then, I mean, rents, we don't really call them rents anyways. We call them membership dues or whatever else the case is. So it's interesting. We're waiting to see what this new administration's going to do and who's put in charge of that. But essentially there's preferred lenders out there who were basically just doing these co-working deals until this PowerPoint slide came out. And now they're like, what do we do? And so it's just an interesting conundrum that people are in because, I mean, there's people that need it. Back to your point, you needed it in order to do what you're doing. A lot of the franchisees or entrepreneurs that are doing this space need the same thing. And so we're trying to overcome those hurdles right now.
Yeah, it's tough. And like I said, being the first is never preferred. I mean, but sometimes, think about it, sometimes there's a need and nobody's doing it and you have to do it and you have to go through all the pains of educating people. That's what makes it hard to be the first is the education process whereby, if you want to talk to somebody about something that already exists, like, I want to build a parking lot. Well, you don't have to educate anybody on that. They just have to determine if that's something they finance or not. So same thing with construction and architects and, everything else. You got to educate everybody along the way. And eventually some people get really good at it and that becomes their niche. And they get a lot of business when that's their niche. Same thing with banks. I mentioned that I found initially I went after Bank 59 because they were the largest self-storage SBA lender in the industry. Live Oak Bank does a lot of self-storage as well. Well, that's what they know. That's what they're good at. Yeah. Other banks don't know it. They don't touch it. So it does take a lot of research and work to figure it out. And I spent about 1.5 years on it.
Yeah. And I think they're just natural hurdles that a lot of entrepreneurs have to overcome. Right. And I think that's part of what we're having to go through is what's the business model, right? What's your pro forma? What does it look like? What do you have stuff written at? How's your space built out? How is it being, marketed? And like what you call rent versus membership is like, okay, but it's no different than us having when we draft legal documents, we say they're licenses, not leases, because then you got to go through the entire sublease process with a landlord. And so like anything else, it's just hurdles that have to be overcome.
And we've taken a lot of that from GWA, the license aspect. I remember coming to Jamie years ago and saying, hey, we need some type of an agreement. And Jamie gave us a document back when she was president of the GWA. She gave us access to a document, which we then took to our attorney. And ironically, we took it to a storage attorney when we did the co-warehousing. And we said, here's this. We grabbed a co-warehousing agreement from, I want to say, ECw&x. And we grabbed the self-storage agreement and we went to a self-storage lawyer in Texas. And we said, put this together. And what we were looking for, especially in co-warehousing, was basically convert the CubeWork agreement from a California agreement to a Texas agreement. And number two, put in chapter 59 of the self-storage, the property code, which allowed us to hold an auction in case they defaulted, how to lock them out. What that, and so basically those were what we wanted combined. And we used that. And of course, since we had business e-suites, we naturally just used the same agreement to keep it simple, especially in our software, which we wanted to keep the same software across the brands. Now we can't do it with storage. That uses a different software than the suites model. The co-working model, the co-working and co-warehousing uses the same software, but our storage software can't rent something with no square footage, like a virtual office, something like a co-working space with no square footage. It can't do it. And it can't rent something by the hour, like a conference room. Okay. As much as I've asked them to, they won't do it because, and I asked them why he won't do it. And they said, you're the only one asking. Again, Gio, another first. Okay. I go to our storage software people, Storable. They're the largest in the industry. And I'm like, would you do this? And they're like, no, nobody else is asking us. And we're not going to rewrite, part of our software for you.
Yep.
And so,
David, how's occupancy on the co-warehousing?
So co-warehousing right now, occupancy is 89%.
Wow.
We expect actually my sweet spot is 90. I won't let it go over 90 if possible, because you need to have some.
Yeah.
If you're over 90, you're not charging enough. You need to do that. But what counters that as opposed to storage, and that's a storage mentality, is we do have people on the co-warehousing that are on a 1, 2, or 3 year agreement. That's as far as we'll go. Well, if you get to 100% occupancy and everybody's got 2 years left on their agreement, then you're at 100%. I mean, that's just the way it's going to work. Whereby storage, they're all month to month. And so you can look at your 10 by 10s and they're approaching 100%, and you can raise the rates and you can expect that, X% are going to move out. And that's how that is managed. So if you try to manage co-working or co-warehousing exactly the same way, which when you do have a term agreement element available, then the fact is, sometimes it's just not going to work out that way. And so will it get to 100%? Yes. But we also like to have the security of knowing that we have an agreement, although we are dealing with small businesses and we can't, guarantee that every one of them, is going to survive. Our mission statement is we help small to mid-sized businesses grow and thrive through the use of our space. So we're not in there operating their company. We're not picking, packing, and shipping for them, although we do offer that service. What we do is we provide the basic space for them to create that possibility. If they overextend themselves or their business fails or whatever, then we lose them. And even if they're in a 3-year agreement, realistically, if they're out of business, they're out of business. So,
yeah, I mean, I think part of what we're having to overcome is these new business models, right? And how people see them and what the overall focus is and who we're targeting, right? Who's the target audience? And so I think part of where we're having to re-educate the entire market is back to your point of people look at, oh, you're only 90% occupied or you're only 85% occupied. And the reality is that's what we want. We want the turnover. We want the ability to add and increase rates. And so there's so much of our industry that we explain to people as hotels, right? Is what a hotel rate is in the morning versus the afternoon as they become more occupied is significantly different. And so I think it's just continuing to educate people on why we look at it that way and why it's important. And it takes people like yourself that are willing to put yourself out there and be first, or just be an overall proponent and be willing to say exactly how your business operates and why we should do things that way.
I think it's also important that we share with each other. some people won't talk about their business, but then a lot of people in the industry, like Shannon and a lot of us do communicate with each other. In fact, when Shannon needed an insurance company, and she was having trouble getting insurance for her co-working out in, am I saying the right name? Shannon out in
Omaha?
no, right. So she calls
Elevator.
me up.
Yeah.
Yeah, elevator. She called me up and she said, who can I talk to? Who can do this? And I said, I've spent a lot of time educating, back to this first, educating this insurance agent. Call him. And you know what? He wrote the policy. And she called me back and she said, thank you so much. Nobody else understood what we were talking about. And so I think we need to do that with each other. Is there a possibility that she's going to come into Houston, Texas? Absolutely. And I hope a company like hers does, because it just means more and more people are aware of the service that we offer. Just like you can't open a public storage in Houston and say, I'm not going to tell anybody else. Oh, well, the more there are, then the more people become educated about it and the more people find that they have a need for this service. So I believe in sharing. And I get calls from people all the time who find me somehow and they say, can you talk to me for a little bit? And I do. I'm not worried about building, creating my own competition, because it's going to come anyway. Now, there are companies that I've talked to when I was learning that wouldn't say a word to me, and I'm not going to say their name, but I just think that's being narrow-minded.
Yeah.
And the special thing about our industry is willingness to share. David, what's next? What's the next thing you're going to surprise Laura with?
Well, I do have plans. On my existing property, I have some more acreage, and I'm going to build some larger office warehouses here, and I'm going to build another Kefi at the very back of the property. I'm already working with the architect. Laura already knows about it. And then I actually am looking to acquire some big box retail stores that are vacant around the country. Now, I'm going to tell you who my competition is when I try to get these. And let me tell you why they're terrible spaces. So if you look at a vacant Sam's Club or a vacant Costco or a vacant Big Lots, okay, what's bad about them for warehousing is their ceilings are not high enough. Because warehousing today, you have to be clear like 40, 50 feet.
Oh, wow.
You have to have like a gazillion truck docks, and you have to have cross docking. Well, we in the co-warehousing world, we don't want any of that, because my walls don't go up higher than 10 feet.
Mm.
And so if the ceiling is, and their average is 23 feet, then that's great. But nobody in the warehouse world is interested in that.
You want something that nobody else wants.
Yeah, but there's these pesky people called gymnasiums and, fitness centers and pickleball people. And
Competing with pickleball, David?
oh my God, yes. They get into these spaces.
Yeah.
They just do awesome. And I love pickleball. And I would seriously open a pickleball court, but the fact is that's not my lane. That's not okay. My lane is creating space to help small to mid-sized businesses grow and prosper. And even though I get into different spaces like storage space and parking space and office space, my mission is the same. None of that says pickleball. Okay. And so therefore, I want to stay in my lane, which is creating that type of space. But I do compete with those people who want to open those spaces, and we're looking at the same buildings. Hopefully my performance shows better numbers and I can offer more for the space than they can, or, whatever. Other than that, I'm not going to get them all, and I can't get them all. The other thing that's next is I would love to franchise Kefi spaces, because I believe that there's a lot of first and second generation immigrants who these are the most entrepreneurial people I have ever met. And I, being in aviation, have been all over the world. First and second generation immigrants in the United States are so entrepreneurial that they would be great candidates to start a Kefi Spaces as long as they had the right foundation. And I have studied McDonald's franchise technique, which is the one I like the best. You know what the tricks are with McDonald's and the way they enforce their brand. And that's what I want to do so that people are operating with a high amount of integrity and structure. And we have a team that can do that for them. So, but it's down the road.
Okay, make no small
Sounds good.
plans.
So, and Laura, I'm going to give you another bit of news. My mission with Laura is in 2025, I will retire her.
Oh, retire her.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I already have her training her replacement right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we are talking about for the business, not the marriage, right?
Yeah.
CFO is out of here.
You know how poor I would be if I dissolved the marriage, man? I would be living in a cardboard box right outside Jamie's house in California with all the other people.
My lot size is not big enough for your cardboard box, just so you know.
But no, seriously, not the marriage, but she wants to play.
Ooh, I like it.
So, you know, her and her friends and everybody from church and
Yeah,
we're
time to
buying,
have some fun.
yeah, we're buying a house, a new house that we can have horses on, and we're going to get a horse and a donkey, and we're going to get a couple of basset hounds, which I love. And we don't have a donkey yet, but it's going to be a miniature donkey, and the donkey's name is Cheeks. Now we don't have the donkey, but we have the name. My son came up with it. Cheeks. Do you know why the name will be Cheeks?
No.
Okay, now I'm not going to say it in courtesy of the thing, but what do you call a donkey?
Oh, right. Okay, I like it. A creative synonym.
We can't say it because we'll get edited by Jamie's daughter.
Yagni will edit us. Did hear recently that donkeys are extremely friendly.
Yeah, and they're very protective.
Okay.
But we're getting a miniature one, and they're more like pets.
That's what I heard. It was somebody else. I think he was talking about a horse farm and that they love to go say hello to the donkeys, and the donkeys greet them like they're a dog, but they're not.
My daughter is mildly autistic, and when she was growing up, my wife took her to equine therapy, and so she's always had a passion for horses, and she takes care of a neighbor's horse.
Okay.
And so I told her when we moved, we downsized, we're going to get a house.
We can have a horse. You know what? That's exactly the context. I was talking to a college roommate, and she was talking about her daughter going to equine therapy. And that's when she brought up the donkey. She was like, I love to go with her. And the donkey says hello. Anyway, we have to go. We have another interview.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We might have to do this again. There's a lot of detail we didn't get into. So thank you for doing this. We've got, the base laid. Give Laura a hug for us.
Tell Laura, tell the boss we said hi.
Yeah.
No problem. If you want to know how to thread the needle, I can go to that on the next one.
Okay. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.